Alright guys, welcome here to Redbeard's Workshop. I'm diving right into this. I feel like because I did the other videos explaining what this project was and asking you guys to vote and then making the video revealing the winner, I didn't have to film an actual video entrance to this one here. You guys can go back and watch those short little videos. They're only 1 or 2 minutes long explaining what this is. But for those of you who didn't see it, I decided to make some D&D pirate ships. I made one years ago that I posted on my Facebook page for the art channel before I even started YouTube. And I love that pirate ship. It was really great. And I realized now that I have some in-person campaigns where players might get to sail, you know, it's kind of fun having a ship, but you want to have another ship. You want to be able to have, you know, 2 ships go against each other and have some combat. So I decided to make a second pirate ship and a third one, which is a Viking raider ship. So I'm going to be making both ships in this video, which might get a little bit confusing because I'm going to be going back and forth between the two as I film. So I apologize for the disorganized nature of that. So I had you all vote on what kind of ship you wanted me to make, and you all voted on a ghost ship and a mimic ship, and they were tied for the win. So I've decided to combine them and make a mimic ship that was destroyed, and now it's a ghost. So we're getting the best of both worlds here. So I'm going to go through the entire stage of building and how I kind of stack pieces together to carve out what I want. I hope you guys really enjoy it, and I'll be popping in to explain things as we go with voiceover. So there are definitely different trains of thought here. You can always go for a natural look if you want to be very realistic and just do wooden planks, long wooden planks for the deck. I like to actually put in playable squares. So for anyone who is beginning to play D&D in person, if you're building your own terrain, you can always use a measuring stick for your player's movement. Typically 1 inch is 5 feet of movement. So if you're going to build a grid on a pirate ship or on terrain, it's pretty great. You just measure out 1 inch squares. That way your players can very easily see how many squares they get to move based on counting, like, oh, I got 25 feet of movement, I can move 5 squares. So I personally like to do this, where I actually have the playable surface, have the grid already on there to make things really easy for them, really easy for me. You can measure out distance for spell attacks and ranged attacks, and then I just take little toothpicks or pens, and I will actually like kind of carve in little wood grain, and I like to do it in opposite directions. That way it has a really cool like sheen effect once everything's painted and sealed.
All right, so at this point in real time, I've put out the poll for you guys to vote and see what kind of ship I'm going to be turning the big one into. And I'm awaiting to see what the results are. Right now, everything's pretty tied. There's 10 or 12 votes, and it's pretty even all the way across. So I'm not sure what we're doing for that one yet. But for our kind of Viking Marauder ship that I'm going to be putting in here, my Raider ship, it's going to be kind of like a Viking Dragon ship where like the front ends are going to curve upward and the back end's going to curve upward. So the idea here is to like cut on an angle here and then smooth out the bottoms on both sides to kind of give that sort of look for those ships. Now the reason I have these posts put in here is because I wanted to very clearly mark where kind of the bottom of that curve is going to be. I'm going to use a hot wire knife to kind of smooth out the insides, but I didn't want to cut so far here that it left me with a very thin or like almost no material on the inside here. So I made sure I knew exactly where the floor is so that now I can mark it about here or so, and that's going to be where it starts. I cut it and it starts to curve upward. So anyway, that's the reason I did that. Didn't want to go too far. And I don't really care about poking holes in this here because when I use my Mod Podge and my paint, that's easily going to fill in. Or I can always cover that up with something. There's all kinds of ways to fix that. I'm not worried about that. It was more important that I made sure that I knew exactly where these points were so I didn't cut too far and start shaving it off from there and then, you know, have very thin points that are going to break later on. So now I'm going to measure a little bit further out, and then that's where I'm going to make my cut lines.
So here I'm kind of just mapping out for myself where the curves in this like Viking Dragon ship are going to be. This one did not end up working out exactly the way I wanted in my head. The finished product is good. So as I was carving here, I realized it was going to be very difficult to carve through it. It was going to be much easier to use my hot foam knife and just cut right through everything. It doesn't make the cleanest cut, so I still had to go back with my knife just to kind of smooth things out a little bit and get some of the curvature that I wanted. It was good using both though. It's a little bit easier to be able to just melt right through things, although your lines aren't going to be as clean. So if you don't go over it with a sander, like I'm going to do later with some sandpaper, or you don't go over it with a knife to get cleaner cuts, it's going to look pretty rigid, which is okay for some projects, but for like wooden planks, it's okay for there to be some roughness, but you do want it to be a little bit uniform as well. And I'm sorry about the shaky cam here. I don't know why this happens. It kind of randomly pops in every now and then where it starts shaking, and I don't quite know why that's happening, but it's kind of frustrating when it does. And you'll see here when I was working on this, I accidentally like popped a piece off, but then I realized how much easier it was to carve out the space that I needed with a piece detached. And although I glued it the night before, the glue still hadn't dried out and cured all the way that I was able to actually take it apart and just carve out what I needed and place it back on there. And it was way easier for me. So then I just did the same thing for the other part, took that off, wiped off the glue so that it would be a smooth surface to glue it back onto. And yeah, everything worked out great. And then I don't know if it was just the material of cutting through layers attached to each other, if it was my lack of a steady hand, but I did not get these these cuts smooth. They were rocky and rigidy. So, I mean, overall, I like the way this ship turned out, but this is the part that frustrates me, that the bows of the ship there are very, like the rails on the bows there are very uneven, and they look really messy. And so if there's one thing about this project I regret for the Raider ship, it's definitely the way those look. And I could have fixed it if I had just continued to sand it and really put a lot of time and effort in, but I knew how long it was going to be to complete both of these ships, and yeah, I chose not to do that. But if you're doing this at home, I would definitely take the time. If you don't have any time constraints, make sure it's smooth, make sure it looks straight, and you'll definitely won't regret the finished product. So this part was actually interesting. I wanted to put this this wooden beam on the front there to kind of seal off the ends of the bows, and I took little nails actually because I was having a hard time getting it to stick to the foam. So I took tiny little nails and I actually punctured right through, and then once I was done covering everything with paint, I went back with silver paint and painted the nails because I thought it actually looked like a cool feature to have on the ship, and I wanted that silver to show through. It's definitely up to you if you're going to do the Raider ship here, how detailed you want this to be. This was difficult because I just had to keep cutting and cutting and cutting to make sure that it was going to fit the curve of the boat. I wanted to have like a sort of a wood carved dragon on the front, like a lot of Vikings had, just to make it a little bit more dramatic. And again, not every ship was like that. A lot of ships just had, you know, curved wood designs. In fact, there was typically some, like, one or two people in a community who actually were responsible for carving runes onto a ship. For luck and for safety and things like that, and they would typically carve it on those parts of the ship. I wanted to make this a dragon boat, like a dragon ship, which is a nickname that a lot of Vikings had when they visited other cultures, because the design of the ship was reminiscent of dragons and was a pretty good scare tactic to frighten people that they would attack. And just another little fun tidbit about history. I put little like pieces of XPS foam in there for bench seats. Typically on a lot of early raider ships that the Vikings used, they would actually put a chest on the ground, and that's what they would sit on when they were rowing. And that chest would be filled with plunder for the way back after their raids. They didn't typically have actual like bench seats on them. I do believe this changed over time, but in the 7th century, I think it was just their loot chests that they would bring with them that they would fill up with goods that they would steal from raids. So at this point, I wasn't sure how much detail I was going to put into it and what details I was going to choose to do. In my first ship, I had a little cutout here, and I had a door to like the captain's quarters. I wanted it to look a little bit different than the first ship I did, so I wanted there to be like that roof part on it, but I still wanted the door in there. So I just very carefully carved out the space here. It's something I probably should have done before I actually put that back piece on for the aft deck. But I didn't think of that ahead of time, and so it was something I had to put in later. Alright everybody, so ignore the mess behind me. I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm going to be doing with this Mimic Ghost ship design. The Raider ship is going along really great. I'm loving all the pieces that I've been putting on there. But as far as the Ghost Mimic ship that you guys all voted on, I had to try to combine the two ideas that I had and not overpower one idea with the other. So kind of the idea is that this was a Mimic ship which was then destroyed, and now the ghost of this Mimic ship is haunting the seas. So I had to kind of incorporate the design I had, plus give it some sort of spectral, kind of afterlife, ethereal type of designs as well. So I'm going to show you guys a very quick sketch that I just jotted down of the ideas I had in my head, just to give you a rough blueprint of what I'm going to try to do. Now, I like to do this sort of thing a lot because often my idea is not at all what I end up having at the end project. But this gives me a good like guidance, so I know where I'm headed, and then later on, if while I'm working, I come up with a better idea or things aren't working and I have to try to change things up a little bit, at least I have a direction, and this is what I'm going to plan on doing, but it might not end up this way. All right, now hopefully you guys can see this stuff okay. It's kind of difficult because I drew very lightly. I drew everything in blue first, light blue, just the basic shape of the ship. And then I drew with pink over top of it so I could try to get all the different layers of things down here. So it may not be the best. See if I can move my camera a little bit closer here so you can see things a little bit better. So I kind of had the rough outline of the ship. And then what I'm going to do is break up the wood. So I'm going to cut into the foam, and I might even actually get some real pieces of wood and like stain them or paint them and then attach them onto the front to make it look like the wooden beams in the front are splitting and breaking apart with a mouth inside. And I'm thinking I'm going to use either polymer clay or some quick dry clay to create the gums. And then I'm going to take some pre-baked clay teeth, put them in there, maybe even a tongue, so that it looks like the front of the ship is breaking open and the mouth is right there. And then I'm going to try to buy some buttons online, do the same thing with the split wood of the foam and maybe some real wood pieces, put some clay in the back there, and then press some buttons, some like eyeball buttons in there, maybe even try to make them glow in the dark. For the actual sail itself, what I want to try to do is use Mod Podge to mold some fabric around a skull that I have to try to make like a 3D imprinted hardened skull shape inside the actual sail, and then put a bunch of tears and rips in it, and then have some chains dangling down to give it more of a ghosty kind of look out of the mouth, off the side of the ship, and off of the actual rigging of the sails. And so this is kind of a side view of what it could look like, and then this is the front view, and then put some like moss and some kelp and things along the bottom to make it look really aged. So that's the plan I have. It looks really messy here, but it's at least a brief basic idea of what I'm trying to do. So let's see what happens. What the hell are you doing, Redbeard? You're destroying your project. Yeah, so I wanted to have, the idea of this ship was that it would look like a normal ship, and then the wood beams would splinter as pieces began to break off and fall into the water. Certain wooden planks would begin to collect into sharpened teeth-like shapes as the front of the bow splits open into a mouth. You see eyes appear between the wooden planks, slobbering jaws with sharp teeth. And you explain it that way to your players. So I cut apart the front of the ship so I could create the jaw pieces for the mouth. And then I decided to do a little bit of clay sculpting in this project. And, you know, clay sculpting is something I did a lot of on the Facebook page when I started my art journey, but I haven't done a lot of it since. For this project, I'm going to use clay to make the teeth. I'm also going to use clay to make the gums and some of the mimic's eyes. So we'll get to that part a little bit later, but just make sure if you're going to use clay that you very carefully follow the cooking instructions on the specific clay that you get. Not all clays are made equal, and you can very easily burn and ruin your projects. Alright, so ignore the weird noise that my oven constantly makes in the background. But I've got here my teeth. The teeth for the mimic's mouth. I'm using this green clay instead of a regular clay because I'm going to paint over it anyway. But the undertones will be this ghostly, slimy green, which is kind of perfect. So a lot of the teeth are pointed or sharpened or formed. But I've also got some long ones in there. So when I make the gums, I can stick some of these like just long, narrow ones right into the clay and have it stick there better. When you're going to be baking them, it's incredibly important to make sure you're not going to over bake any clay that you make. Read the package and do exactly what it tells you, and make sure the oven is fully preheated before you begin. And also, when you are going to bake them, make sure your pieces are not touching, because if they bake together, they're going to be stuck together. For something like this, which is a mimic's mouth, it wouldn't be the end of the world because a lot of their teeth are kind of arranged weird anyway on that creature. But still, do the best you can to have them separated so that you have the options later on. And the other thing that you got to remember here is typically they want clay to be a 1/4 inch thick when you're baking it to avoid it cracking or burning in the oven. There's some really thin pieces here, so that's why rather than just putting it on an open sheet, I decided to put it in this dish on some wax paper, so hopefully that prevents it from burning. fingers crossed, we'll see how it goes. Alright, so my tip for you guys for putting your mast into your ship, I like just kind of like using the edges of the wooden dowel to press the shape in so I know what I'm doing. If you're going to be using a hot wire knife or any knife to cut it in to make the space here, make it smaller rather than larger. Use the inside of the line you make to make your cuts, because if it needs to be pressed in or it's a little too tight, that's going to be much easier to work with. If you make the space for your mast too big, then now you have to fill in the space, or else you're going to put your glue in, you're going to put your mast in, it's going to be leaning to the side, and when your project's done, your masts aren't going to be straight and vertical, and they're going to look pretty bad. So now what I'm doing is I'm getting ready to stain everything, but I have to prepare it first. So the large wooden dowels are going to be the masts. We're going to be staining everything a black color. And then what I wanted to do is actually add some real wood to the side of the ship as well, just to give it a more natural look. I mean, you can always use a toothpick and run it along the sides, which I do eventually, to give it like a wood grain look. XPS foam carves really well, which is one of the best things about it. But I thought it would just look better to have some legitimate wood pieces. So I took some simple, popsicle sticks, whatever you want to call them, cut them to various shapes so that I had lots of random sizes to work with, broke some up to have some splintered ones as well. That way I could kind of just like eyeball it and change it up as I wanted. If you're going to be using any kind of wood stain, I mean, I do wood carving, so I have a lot of different stains. Make sure you have a well-ventilated area, as you should with any kind of like paint or paint thinner or any kind of material like this. You can actually use paint thinner on wood stain if you think it's too dark and you want to lighten it up a little bit. But for me, what I do is I typically just glob it on and then use a paper towel pretty roughly, or even a cloth, to kind of rub off as much as I can. If I like the color, great. If I want it to be a little bit lighter, then I'll come back with some mineral spirits or some paint thinner to lighten up the color. So I have not really worked on clay in years at this point. And so a lot of this clay, it hasn't gone bad or anything, but it is really hard. It is really tough. And even if you have brand new clay, it's usually pretty soft and workable, but sometimes you'll get a brand new package of clay and it's rough and you really got to work it in your hands for a while. One trick, which is really great, is to get a pasta maker and run your clay through your pasta maker because it'll flatten it out. You do that a bunch of times and it's really workable, really soft, and really easy to use. There's also different hardness of clays that you can purchase. I do have a pasta maker. When I was doing clay projects all the time, I had it clamped on the side of my table. However, it has been a while, so I have it packed away in a box somewhere, so I had to kind of go crazy with it. So once I kind of fit it into the shape that I wanted, I'm using texturing tools to kind of put some rough lines in there, and then I'm using the back end of the tool to press in a space to fit the teeth into, and then sort of just pressing the clay back around the teeth to have them fit in there properly.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? Early in the morning, way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises. Early in the morning, put him in the longboat until he's sober. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Put him in the longboat until he's sober. Early in the morning, way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises.
So I'm really excited about this part. If you've looked at mimic art online, you know they've got tons of eyes popping out in weird places. I definitely wanted to do that. I didn't know how many eyes I was going to end up using, but I found these really cool glass bead eyes that people use in clay sculptures all the time, or even for dolls. So typically I just like search doll eyes, and I found these really cool like reptilian ones, and they're glow in the dark. So you can like press a black light up to them or even a regular light and they do glow, which I thought was a really neat feature for like a ghost ship mimic. So I bought a bunch of these and created these extra little pieces that I could put on top of the ship so I could place eyes pretty much wherever I wanted to put eyes on the ship. Alright everybody, so I'm going to be splitting this video into 2 videos just because it's way too long and I just don't want to make an hour-long video. So we're going to split it up into 2. There's a lot of work going into this one, so I didn't expect doing 2 ships was going to take this long. So far, at current point, I'm actually almost done the project. I've only got a little bit left. But I'm going to go back in, edit the videos, and cut some of this out. So basically, all I'm going to have left to do at this point in the video, I'm going to show the painting in part 2. I'm going to show the dry brushing. I'm going to show how I'm adding wood to the ghost mimic ship. And then all the little details, including the sails. Now, typically what I do for the sails is I take these little wooden dowels and I'll attach them to the mast using glue and some thread. And then we're going to attach the actual sails to it. Now, for my first ship that I made, I used the wooden dowels again, kind of adhered them to the masts, and then I basically just took Kleenex. This is just Kleenex, and I, found my points to tie it together and then pulled it down a little bit so it looks like furled sails, which is pretty great. I love the way it looks. It's awesome. And I've got some of the ropes heading up to the rigging there. This time what I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make real sails. I'm going to use cloth fabric. If I have to sew stuff together, I'm going to sew it together. I'm going to make real sails on this one, and then I'm going to thread it through the sails and wrap it around the dowel. So it's going to look a lot more realistic for this ship, for the Ghost Mimic ship and for the Raider ship. I'm going to do fabric sails for both of them. So yeah, once I get that done, I've already got the little platforms made for the Ghost ship as well. So once I get the sails put in, I'll then put these on, and then we're going to do a lot of this threading and rigging on the ship. So I'm going to put, on this one I didn't have that front sail on the bowsprit. I'm going to do that on the Ghost Mimic ship. So it's going to be a lot of threading and wrapping. And on this one, I only wanted to have the one set of ropes heading up to the center mast, the main mast. Just because I wanted to make it an easy to place ship where I could get my characters in and wouldn't have to like work around them too much. But I think on that ship I'm gonna do this bit here on both of the center masts. So there's gonna be a little bit of work to add in there. So far my footage has been somewhere between 8 and 9 hours worth of work. I've done a little bit of work off camera as well, so it's definitely been a lot. But part 2 is going to be awesome. We're going to finish everything up, complete the 2 ships, and I can't wait for you guys to see this finished product. I've been having so much fun making this. It's been one of the, like, this was one of the most fun projects I ever did, was making this first D&D ship. And the other 2 I'm making are coming out so well. Things that I didn't necessarily plan to work out the way they did, but I'm really happy with how they've worked out. So I am so excited for you guys to watch part 2 and see how everything finishes up on my Raider ship and the ship you all voted for, the Ghost Mimic ship. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on part 2 here on Redbeard's Workshop.